Welcome to this presentation by the International Society of Guatemala Collectors. My name is David Reitzema. This is part two of a two-part series about Guatemalan forgeries. The first part was how to identify forgeries, and this part is designed to assist collectors like you in deciding whether or not you want to buy a stamp that you see in a dealer's stock or on eBay, particularly on internet websites. This is brought to you by the International Society of Guatemala Collectors. Their website is www.guatemalastamps.com and is the authentic, authoritative source for all things Guatemalan philately related. As a review, we're going to look at this slide, which talks about definitions of fakes and forgeries. The primary purpose of a forgery is to defraud the Postal Service and is very similar, and is as similar as the forger can make it to a genuine issued stamp. As a side, very few of the Guatemalan forged stamps were ever used postally, primarily the issues of 1898 and 1916 and 1917. The primary purpose of a fake is to defraud stamp collectors. It's often very similar in dimensions and appearance to an issued genuine stamp. And the third category are bogus stamps, and their sole purpose is to defraud stamp collectors. And the example that you see on the screen here, that is not similar to any issued stamp, but it does appear attractive, and that's the purpose, is to appeal to stamp collectors. In this presentation, I'm going to use the terms forgery and fake interchangeably, and that's in some sense the same way that they're used in the Guatemala handbooks. And I want to start by saying the resources of the International Society of Guatemala Collectors are indispensable. Most of what I know has come from those handbooks, and I would encourage you to go to those if you want more information about this subject. Continuing our review of forgeries, in part one, we talked about the technical identification of genuine and forged stamps. The first technique is to look at the design and see how it compares with a genuine stamp. The second is the printing technique used. For example, on the first issue of Guatemala, the genuine stamp was engraved. The forgeries are lithographed. The third identification technique is to look at the perforations. For example, the 1878 Indian woman issue has several different forgeries, but the perforation of those are all different from the genuine issued stamp. And the fourth method of identifying a forgery or a fake is the cancellation on the stamp. So today, what we're going to do is move beyond that on a more practical basis and talk about how to deal with looking at these, for example, on eBay and deciding whether or not to buy those. There's a number of rules that I have in looking at these, and rule number one is that the stamp must be listed in the handbooks of the International Society of Guatemala Collectors. First of all, Scott is somewhat reliable, in part due to the work of the Society. In the 1970s, the Society had completed their work on the Guatemala I and Guatemala II handbooks. And as a result of that, the Society was well aware of the shortcomings of Scott catalog. Roger Frigstad went to the Scott editor of the Guatemala section and met with that editor, and as a result, the Scott catalog was significantly improved and more authoritative. When I'm on, for example, eBay, if I see a listing that refers to some other catalog, to me, that's immediately suspect. The Mikkel and Evert, first of all, are basically inaccessible to collectors in the United States. Secondly, they're almost unusable. For example, Mikkel's section on Central America, even if you have the catalog, you have to have that particular portion of the catalog and be able to find the stamp you're looking for. So for me, if it's not in the handbooks, any other reference to a different catalog is immediately suspect. And at the bottom of this slide, I put a summary of what I just said, and that is, if the stamp is not in the handbook, it's not genuine. I believe that's true. It's possible, of course, that subsequent research or efforts will find some exception to that. But for us as collectors today, that's a good guide. Continuing the discussion about having listed the stamp in the handbook, I have listed here, shown illustrations of stamps which are offered repeatedly for sale as if they are genuine. The first on the left is a 1897 exposition stamp with an overprint saying Servicio Interno. There's 6 or 7 varieties of that overprint. It's on stamps, it's on postal cards, and is quite appealing and attractive, and in fact is still listed in, for example, Mikkel's and Evert, and it's one reason why dealers listing this stamp for sale refer to those catalogs. It was listed in Scott's and was removed 50 years ago. It's clearly bogus and is not listed in the handbook. The middle stamp has an 1916-17 surcharge. There are an infinite number of varieties of this, and part of the confusion with these is that there were midnight printings, which actually it seems used the presses of the Guatemalan printing office so that the measurements of these surcharges, even if they're bogus, are almost identical with the genuine issued stamps. And then the 1898 surcharges are seen a lot on internet websites. They come in all different varieties, and just looking at it with the naked eye, it looks genuine and pretty appealing. It's a nice. If you saw that issue for sale for $10, you might be tempted to purchase it. But the rule is, if it's not listed in the handbooks, it's bogus. Rule number 2 is is the stamp suspect? And there's certain things, so suspect. So you'd say, well, how am I supposed to suspect this? In the first place, many Guatemalan stamps were issued in limited quantities. And secondly, many of the faked and forged stamps were faked with a higher value than the basic stamp. So when we start looking at these, we come into them with a suspicion. So the stamp on the left is a 1911 surcharge, and 20,000 of these were printed, which is not very many. ISGC expert Harvey Beagle estimated that 75 to 85% of the ones he examined were faked. Furthermore, this stamp was reportedly at the Guatemalan post office and only available if you brought a letter into the post office where the stamp was affixed to the cover. And as a result, you can assume or be suspicious that the plethora of fakes that are offered for sale contain a vast majority of fakes. The second stamp is an example of a higher value placed on a lower value stamp. And that makes sense if you think about it, because the faker could buy a 6-cent stamp and increase the value to 25 centavos. And not only that, but create wonderful varieties with a basic underlying 6-centavo stamp. And then the 1898 issue was surcharged on revenue stamps, which were readily available. So there was a large pool of stamps to use as the basic source material for surcharges. And you'll see these offered constantly in great quantities on internet websites. The one on the left of those two is a Carmen in red surcharge. It catalogs $100. And so our question is it genuine? And that's what you have to decide, whether you want to take a risk that it is genuine or not. But at least you have a suspicion that the basic printing was faked on a vast scale. Rule number 2, and that is, are they suspect, is illustrated by the 2 stamps on the left. Again, we have higher denominations on low denomination stamps. We have errors. They are always offered on the internet websites, and you have no initial idea of whether they're genuine. But if you know how many of these have been forged, you at least have some concern as to whether or not you want to take a risk buying them. The stamps on the right are surcharges that were issued by Guatemala from 1908 through 1913. And in my experience, these are, the forgeries are far more common than the genuine stamps. I, for many years, collected perforation varieties of these, and I can tell you that the Scott catalog value of these is not a reflection of how scarce or difficult it is to find genuine surcharges. With that in mind, I always have a suspicion that any error of these is a fake. So when I look at, and then as a last thought, any online listing referencing some catalog like Evert is suspect. If it's not in the handbook, then it's appealing to dealers to reference a catalog that no one has access to as some effort to legitimize the listing. So, in conclusion, all stamps with known fakes are suspect. Rule number 3, we're going to talk about surcharges and cancels. And the first thing I look for is the surcharge level? So if you look at these, the top stamp obviously is not level. The second stamp on the left, lower left, is not level, and the third stamp on the lower right is not level. I was doing a presentation once and someone asked me if, as a rule, all stamps that are not level are fakes. And the answer to that is no, but if you understand any basic printing principle, you'll understand that to find a cockeyed surcharge that's genuine would be unusual. And the reason is that the fakers who put these together did not have access to the same quality of printing press that the government printing office did. So they would make a fake surcharge like we see here, and sometimes they would actually perhaps have 5 of these in a row called a cliche, and they would then apply those to the basic stamp itself. The problem they had was they could not easily get the surcharge to be level. So when you're looking at these issues, my rule is if it's not level, I assume automatically that it's a fake. Rule number 3 continued is B, is the surcharge defective? Now this is a little harder to see online, and so typically what I will do is I will make a copy of the listing and then blow it up. And so just looking at this, we're not measuring the surcharge, which is probably with this issue the best way to determine whether it's a fake. But you can see in looking at this a variety of odd characteristics. If I look at the numeral 1 on the left of the date surcharged on this stamp, they're not the same. And you might say, well, it's possible that they over-inked the numeral that we see here on the left more than on the right, which of course would be most likely if it was a faker who didn't have access to some kind of inking roller. Secondly, this is a double surcharge, so you can see the faint second surcharge with the numerals, which are the easiest way to see it. And here we have a problem because it's possible that it would be under inked, but it's not likely. In that case, you not only have an error, but you have a printing process default, which isn't really acceptable. And then at the second surcharged 1912 on the lower left, if you look at the numeral 1 there, it's smaller. It's doesn't resemble the ones on the top. And so if we look at the keys that I have, 1 is, does it have broken letters? 2, does it have unmatched fonts? 3, does it have blurred letters? 4, look at the color and intensity of the ink. And then be aware that occasionally, which could be the case in this stamp, fakers would print a fake surcharge on a genuine surcharged stamp. So of course, in this case, if it was a genuine original surcharge with an added fake, it would be to the faker's benefit to have a fainter image that wasn't so readily comparable to the genuine. Rule number 3 continued. We've talked about, is the surcharge level? Is it suspect? And now we're going to talk about cancels, because many of the early issues, the used example is worth more than the mint example. So I have listed here, shown here, some common fake surcharges. The one on the upper left is a Spiro fake, and it's a very common fake. That's the best example I could find. It shows most of the Spiro fake. The second from the left is a second Spiro fake cancel. It's very common. You see it listed on internet websites regularly and often. The two on the upper right are Fournier fakes. And we talked about, we saw those last week. The Fournier fake on the second issue on the yellow stamp there is very common. That stamp doesn't happen to be worth more used, but if it's a stamp that doesn't have gum, for example, then it makes it more attractive to have a cancel on it. Those two dates, by the way, the August date and the May date, 1878, are always the same. There were two of those that Fournier used, and it's one of those two. Now, on the lower left, when we talk about cancels, is the 1897 issue, and fakers used this El Hicaro cancel as part of their effort to increase the value of the underlying stamp. And just so that you at least are aware and might think of this at some point, the cancel on the lower right is an example of the cancel that was used by a German dealer who bought the remainders of the 1897 issue from the Guatemala post office. It's slightly different than the Waterloo cancel in use in 1897, and is common on higher value denominations of this issue. This is a practical example of the process I go through, and both of these I downloaded from eBay a few days ago, so these are listings that probably are still alive right now. And so we'll take the example on the left first. If you'll hopefully be able to see and notice, the stamp on the left is a 12.5 centavos surcharge. The stamp on the right is a 13.5 centavos inverted surcharge. So it's listed. If I look at this, there's a number of things that I'm going to look for in this. First of all, is the surcharge level? Now, if I look at this, and hopefully you look at this, you can see that it is not. Secondly, is it suspect? And if the 13.5 centavo surcharge is listed, it appeared in one position on a sheet of 100, so that it is possible that this pair could be from one of those positions in the sheet. However, it is inverted, and that is not in the handbook. So we have a number of rules here that come into play that lead me to say, I don't want to spend 29.99 British pounds for this item because it's not level, it's not in the handbook, and it's suspect. The stamp on the right is even worse. We just saw the El Jicaro cancel in the previous slide, which is shown here on this stamp. This stamp's listed for sale for $135, and it's a rare stamp, mint or used. However, not only does it have a fake cancel, but it also is part of the 1897 issue that was overprinted for use with the telegraph overprint. Those were overprinted on this stamp in red, and many of those overprints were removed by using chemicals. And so if you look at this, it's not only does it have a fake cancel, but you can see how mottled and nasty looking the stamp itself is. And we talked about these in part 1, but if you had that stamp, could determine whether it was a fake by turning the printed side down onto a sheet of white copy paper and rubbing it on that copy paper. If it leaves a smudge, it's a stamp that had the overprint removed. So once again, we have two problems with this stamp, and looking at it and deciding whether I want to pay $135 for this. It has a fake cancel and it's suspect. It looks like it's been chemically altered. So hopefully those two examples will give you some feeling for how I deal with buying these. When I am looking for fakes and forgeries and bogus stamps, and obviously we all are attracted to these on some level, perhaps on the most basic, we don't want to buy them by mistake. But many collectors enjoy these and look for these. And so it's a popular collecting topic. It's very interesting. It's probably as interesting as any other area of Guatemalan philately. And so I have certain rules that I follow, and I also want to share with you some ways that I collect these. Number one, if I'm in doubt, I won't pay very much. I might pay to buy an error, but I'm not going to pay some big percentage of catalog because there's no guarantee from anyone, including the dealer, that these are genuine. Secondly, if I want to be able to enlarge all internet website images to be able to see the stamp more easily and examine it for what I consider to be signs that this may or may not be genuine. And I have a rule: if I cannot enlarge an image, and there are certain reasons why you cannot, it depends on how they're listed, but if I cannot enlarge them, or if the image that is on the screen is blurred, I won't buy it. Most of my forgeries, fakes, and bogus stamps have come from buying groups of stamps or collections. And this has become, at least for me, and I suspect it may be for you as well, with time, in the past 20 years, it's become increasingly difficult, and I'm not sure why that is. 20 or 25 years ago, I could buy collections of Guatemala. I could buy Minkus albums with various Central or South American countries grouped in them. And for some reason, these things are becoming more and more difficult to find. It might be because 25 years ago, collections of collectors were being sold who'd had them for 30 years. And now, in 2020, we didn't have that many collectors 25 years ago. And I think a second reason is that many of these collections are being broken down and the contents are being sold individually on eBay or some other site. And so they just simply don't seem to be on the market. But that's how the majority of my fakes, forgeries, and bogus stamps have been acquired at a reasonable price rather than by trial and error at a stamp show or online. So that completes this part 2 presentation of Guatemalan fakes and forgeries. And for more information, I'd encourage you to visit the International Society of Guatemala Collectors. Their online membership is $10 for a year. There's a lot of articles about forgeries there, and all of the ISGC publications are on that website available to members, including both of the handbooks as well as all issues of El Quetzal. If you want to contact me, you can also do that via the Society's website contact information. Thank you for attending this presentation, and I wish you happy collecting.